apocalyptimist. Yeah, I fully recognize that we are in deep trouble, and some of what you'll see tonight is all about the nature of that deep trouble and our spiritual disconnection, our separation from nature rather than simply acknowledging the reality that we are a part of. Everything I'm about to say is predicated upon the idea that mitigation will be successful. Now, so I'm not going to talk about mitigation of greenhouse gases. I'm going to assume that at some point in the near future, we're going to wake up and we're going to get that job underway, and we're going to get really serious about it. In so doing, we have a major task in terms of how we adapt our human engineered infrastructure and the natural world and our natural resources to the changes that are in motion and will continue in motion regardless of how effective our mitigation is. In other words, climate change is a freight train. You can put on the brakes, but it's still going to roll on for several miles before it comes to a halt. So what do we do about that in Maine? Well, Maine is all about natural resources. In fact, it is nothing but natural resources in a very real sense, and agriculture. And so we need to talk about what the implications of that is for the Maine economy. Climate change is the greatest market failure in history. There is no legitimate way to externalize the impact of climate change. You can't take it out of your business model, although many have obviously done so. So the question is, how do we encompass that in our business model moving forward? Let's look at some of the data. The red line at the top is the trajectory that we're on. This comes from the U.S. Global Change Research Program just a year ago. Global temperature rise by the end of the century somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 degrees Fahrenheit, according to the UK Hadley Center, or 4.5 degrees centigrade, according to the rather conservative assessment of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, 5th assessment. So just put that in context. The concentrations of CO2 are now higher than they have been in 4 million years. That's an average. It could be much greater than that. That's a sort of a minimum target back in time. And the rate of CO2 increase is faster now than in 65 million years. Stunning changes are underway, and the changes are accelerating. Not just those driven by climate change, but those driven by our use of natural resources. The manifold impact of more and more people using natural resources, which is one of the things you're going to see in this film tonight. So this is what keeps me awake at night. I know many people are worried about the impact of climate change on human engineered infrastructure. What I worry about is the impact of climate change on natural systems and semi-natural systems. So we know that the climate zones are on the move, and their speed of movement is accelerating, and I call this the overlooked ecological imperative. Climate zones are moving faster than many organisms can adapt or migrate. This poses an ethical quandary for us. How do we intervene in ecosystem form and function? And I'll talk more about that. We also see the same motion, northward coastal movement of exceedingly warm waters. This is the Gulf of Maine. Just a few years ago, both surface and bottom waters are at record 150-year high, essentially the record high since temperatures were ever taken. The implications of this for our marine fisheries are profound, and that's another discussion and a very important one. So, was what happened to us this winter unusual? Did it have anything to do with climate change? One of the things to say about climate change and extreme weather is any given weather event cannot be said to be caused by anthropogenic or human-caused climate change. That's the wrong question to ask. All weather is now occurring in a human-altered climate. That's reality. So the real question is, which features of a weather event are likely linked to the alterations that we have made in the climate? Well, we've got an exceedingly warm ocean. You can see that it was at a record warmth anomaly. The actual temperature may have been cooler than other places, say down by the equator, but the differential from what the average is and what it was this winter in February and January was the greatest on the planet at the time, an exceedingly warm body of water. You've got a polar vortex that's driving Arctic air down south. It comes down and it hits that warm water and it comes back in as nor'easters with a lot of snow. At least that's how it's been explained to me. So the other thing that we have ongoing right now in the North Atlantic that promises to alter the weather in Maine for a very long period of time to come, I think, is this unprecedented cooling in the North Atlantic. The Gulf Stream is slowing because there's this pool, you can see a little bit up there in this image, this pool of exceedingly cold water that's being driven by the melt-off of ice in the near the polar circle. So that Gulf Stream is slowing. We're not going to enter a day after tomorrow scenario, that weird science fiction movie. But nonetheless, in 300 years, something like that could start to transpire. It wouldn't be what was shown in that movie by any means. But the slowing of the Gulf Stream has profound implications for how this weather interacts with the Atlantic Ocean. It has profound implications for sea level rise. It means that the sea level rise off the coast of Maine will be higher than most of the eastern seaboard, south of, say, New Jersey and North Carolina. So that northern part of the eastern seaboard is going to see significantly higher sea level rise because this big bolus of water is now sloshing back toward the shore, whereas it usually has forward inertia that pulls it away from the shore. It also interacts in a complex way with the motion of the Earth, the turning of the Earth, that also results in higher sea level rise. So this is a profound result for Maine. It's something to pay attention to. If you have a road that crosses water within 100 miles of the coast, you need to reconsider that road for re-engineering. You need to go look at it. You need to ask the question, is it able to survive the next 50 years? And the 50-year timeline is the appropriate one. We're in a decadal time frame that we're talking about here. When I'm not talking about next week, I'm not talking about next month or even next year. I'm talking about 20, 30, and 40 years out. And one of the things to note about Maine is our climate zones are compressed into less than 4.5 degrees latitude, whereas they're normally spread over 23 degrees latitude. There and in Europe, the same thing is true in Europe. So we have a very singular situation. There is potential for climate change to move very rapidly across the state, having profound impacts on our natural resources. So at Unity College, we've championed sustainability science. It's education and research that seeks to understand the complexity of the interactions among economy, society, and nature, and propose concrete solutions to complex problems. This covers all sorts of fields. It is not merely interdisciplinary. We call it transdisciplinary because we hope to train the students in how to acquire the knowledge and apply it in a problem-solving context. So sustainability science is knowledge for mitigation of climate. Mitigation is reducing the greenhouse gases that we emit or avoiding emissions that would otherwise occur. Adaptation is how do we adapt to the changes that are underway, that freight train that even if we put the brakes on is going to keep rolling. And resilience is how do we install into our communities and into our natural resources the ability to bounce back from this change or to continue to function in the face of change. Ecosystems are complex entities. This is endorsed by the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. There's an entire section of the proceedings of the National Academy that's dedicated to sustainability science. So one of the points that I want to make is that social science often is given a seat at the end of the table. It's not really given a full representation in dealing with the problems that we're up against. And I think it needs to be top dead center. And management. And when I say management, I'm really talking about managing human systems and managing natural systems. So a lot of what gets taught at Thomas College in terms of business management is applicable in this context. So we've got identifying risks and vulnerabilities, planning, assessing and selecting options, implementation, and so on. And we involve stakeholders all the way along the chain. One thing that should be axiomatically obvious is that proactive adaptation is far less expensive and disruptive than reactive adaptation. If you wait until the storm arrives, it's going to be much more expensive than preparing well in advance for that storm. So we need to get busy. And what we have in Maine is a train wreck. It's underway, it's slow motion, it's happening over a decadal time frame. Many of the young people in Maine will experience this fully. For those of us with a little snow or maybe missing hair on our heads may see a good chunk of this, but it's definitely underway. And the first part of it is a failing economy driven by an upside-down demography. There are fewer and fewer young people in Maine and an older and older population. And our economy is not doing well, in case you hadn't noticed. The state economy is not very robust. That's going to run headlong into the transformation of our natural resources driven by climate change over time. This is the thing that I think we really need to be paying attention to. So let's look at the reality for Maine. Maine has had a declining birth rate since 1990. It's the oldest population with a median age of 42.7 in the nation. It has the highest old age dependency per 100 working adults. Florida, West Virginia, and Maine are roughly statistically equivalent. There's no real difference between those three states. So Maine has been in a declining market in several economic sectors over the last 2 decades, very slow decline, and has recovered from the 2008 recession much slower than the rest of the U.S. That's documented reality. So let's find a different future for Maine. Let's start with our assets. Let's do an inventory. We've got abundant fresh water. We've got a small farm economy that's growing. Young people are coming to the state to be farmers. We've got a functional marine infrastructure. It's in danger of that warming that's moving up the coast. It's going to change the base of their productivity. Forest in large single owner parcels. Some could say this is a disadvantage, but those private owners want solutions. They want to know how to manage those forests, and we're not giving them many options right now. Abundant raw materials for biofuels, land trust with established legal access of some form for conservation, and a system of higher education that's in deep trouble, but has very good bones. Very good bones. There's a University of Maine at Orono is one of the top 100 universities in the nation for the National Science Foundation. That's not to be taken lightly. That's a very, very important advantage. Challenges. Inverted demography, slow economic recovery, cultural sectors that view in-migration as undesirable. I've personally experienced that as being from away, and it's real. Inadequate and deteriorating infrastructure, including bridges, roads, hydro. We've all experienced that. Rapidly shifting climate zones and ecology. A mistaken belief by many that the impacts of climate change will not be severe and they'll be manageable. Well, what is a knowledge economy? Well, it's got these components according to one group of experts. Open innovation, education is very important. Management of the information, creativity needs to be fostered. Technology and information systems need to be at the base of it. We can define it very simply as production of services based on knowledge-intensive activities that accelerate the pace of desired outcomes. Key component is greater reliance on intellectual capabilities than on technology or raw materials. This sounds like adaptation to me. You know, adaptation has certain technological components, but it's basically management. And so let's look at some examples. There are many examples that I could bring before you. How are we going to manage sustainable and organic agriculture? It's a growing sector of our economy. Perhaps we should be paying attention to it. Well, we've got to provide young families with needed tax incentives, low interest loans, debt relief. Oregon needed doctors. My brother finished his residency in the mid-70s. Oregon made him a deal. He said, we'll defray a lot of your cost of your education if you'll come and practice medicine in Oregon. Worked out great. He just retired. You know, so what are we doing along those lines? Could we think about that? Viable niche and specialty markets certainly exist. We need to capitalize on those markets. We need to build intermediate scale packaging and distribution facilities that don't exist. Here's a technological aspect, but most of it is this. We need sophisticated knowledge to manage and adapt agriculture in the face of climate shifts. What do we know about this? Precious little right now, but that doesn't mean we can't know a lot about it. So let's talk about our biological communities. This is a famous cartoon, excuse me. This is a famous cartoon where you see New Hampshire ending up at the border between North and South Carolina by the end of the century. It's actually more severe since this was written, since this was drawn. A similar pattern is taking place in Maine. And if we look at the distribution of forest communities, and they're a surrogate really for the ecosystem. So really you're looking at a map of ecosystems here, not just tree species. This is the present day habitat suitability. Suitability is a key word there. And this is the suitability that could exist in 2100. We will have broadleaves up in Maine, very few maples, that actually are generalists. They can adapt and flourish under a range of water and temperature conditions and soil conditions. I don't think we want that. I think we actually want to manage for other economically viable species. Accordingly, we need to begin management now. If you know what kind of forest you want in the Elliotteville plantation north of Katahdin, where they want to put the national park, in 2070, if you have some idea what that should be, and there are people that do, we need to begin managing for that forest today. So here's an example of collaboration that I think we all need to take to heart. This is a 12 Rivers conservation ethic. It's a bunch of land trusts that have gotten together and they've mapped out their locations, and the arrows suggest the construction of habitat corridors. One question I have is, who is creating the adaptation plan for our conserved lands? Who's doing that? Is it DEP? Is it the Inland Fish and Wildlife? I actually don't think anybody's tending the shop here. If you ask Chandler Woodcock, which I did, what's their long-range plan for wildlife, he's very proud of the fact that there's a 15-year plan for white-tailed deer. I would suggest if you're not talking 2050, you're not even at the table for discussion. That's what we need to be focusing on. And habitat corridors are increasingly hugely important. I went to one of the big, highly ranked wildlife programs in the Midwest. I got my bachelor's degree in forestry, fisheries, and wildlife. And the primary tool at that time was the creation of preserves with specific species in mind. And I was told that if I did that, I would have done my job. But think about it for a minute. Now the climate zones are moving out from over the base of the food chain of those preserves that we've created. So now we need a much more sophisticated and dynamic approach to managing the plants and the animals in those locations. And that sophisticated and dynamic approach may involve transplantation, assisted migration, assisted transplantation. We move them to another location. We need to think hard about how we do that, and we need to be developing the expertise to do it now. We've got great academic institutions in Maine that can help us do that. They need to be directed and resourced in order to do that. So how do you build the adaptation knowledge economy? Well, start by fully understanding the system that must adapt. And it's actually systems. It's multiple systems that are interacting. Involve for-profit funders and nonprofits from the outset. One of the things I find as president of Unity College is the nonprofits will come to me independently, even though they have a clear relationship to some of the profits in the area, some of the profit-making organizations. We need to sit down at the same table together, the NGOs, the governmental organizations, the for-profits, the nonprofits. We need to start comprehensive planning. Collaborative strategic planning among all institutions of higher education, including Colby, Bates, and Bowdoin. We need everybody at the table. We're all Mainers. We all need to be talking about how we do this and how we build the research and education network. We need to cultivate leadership at many different levels. That's an obvious one. Create multiple opportunities for connection and communication, many of which don't exist right now, and I can give you concrete examples of that. But here is by far the most important. Design for a network, not an organization. Invest in collective infrastructure. That's why you bring all these guys together to the same table and say, okay, we're all in. We're all going to contribute to the building of this future. And we need to remain flexible. The future cannot be predicted. It can be projected, but not predicted. And we need to be committed to a long-term vision to make Maine the best place for developing, innovating, teaching, and learning adaptation. The challenge is enormous. We need to get serious about systems management. I'm not going to ask you to read this, nor am I going to take you through it. I bet you're grateful. This is a community concept map for the town of Port Orford. And you can see they have multiple interacting complex systems. Has anybody done that for Maine? Has anybody done that for Waterville? Has anybody done that for Belfast? Done it for Bangor? Done it for Portland? I think we need to be doing that. And you take this information and you inform the development of scenarios. Scenarios are created by experts. And so you have drivers that can, oops, sorry, my thumb is too big. So you have drivers that are determined by those systems interaction that in various ways can create different outcomes. Now nobody can tell you for sure which of the outcomes will occur, but our interest in doing the scenario analysis is to truly understand the drivers. And this is work that needs to be done. So where's the money? So we create this thing, how do we make money off of it? I think a lot of people are fairly pragmatic, they want to know that. Well, there are at least four obvious sources of revenue. First, we could sell Maine's carbon resources and carbon offsets, participate more vigorously, much more vigorously in carbon markets. Here's the Western and Eastern Hemisphere. You can see that worldwide cap and trade programs are off and running gangbusters. They're not doing so great in the United States, but other places they're very, very busy. And there's enormous economic opportunity there. Adaptation could be Maine's biggest service industry. Right now, it's medical care and Hannaford's. Enough said. What about environmental services? That's starting to take off elsewhere. Let me make a prediction. 30 years from now, those companies that do environmental assessment are going to be for-profit creating adaptation. And we're going to be paying them to do it. And other places will be paying them to do it. Why can't they be Maine companies? We've got the right resources here. I've said since the day I walked in the door here, Maine is the best laboratory and classroom for natural resources on the planet. We've got it all right here. So, focused on adaptation, higher education could bring millions more from away. We could actually make our higher education enterprise much more robust. We could stop worrying about where the student's going to come from. We need to give them a value proposition that they want. Maine is an easy sell. It's easy to sell Maine, but you have to have a value proposition for those students. What do they want? I can tell you the one thing they want, and we've done very, very well at it. Our enrollment is surging. We're bursting at the seams. Is they want relevance, and they know this stuff is hugely important. Are we giving them that opportunity from all of our institutions? And finally, we should be exporting the know-how. We should be exporting the innovations. I think there's enormous opportunity here. So thank you. So I'm happy to answer a few questions if anybody has the stamina for that. Yes?
What about leadership at the state level? I see it as lacking, and I'd like to get some insight on what you're thinking
there. Yeah, you're right. It's lacking. It's an enormous problem at the state level. And I, for one, really believe that governmental engagement is absolutely necessary. I don't think we write off the government as being bad. I think we make it better. Big government, small government, I don't care. How about good government? That's what we need. You know, I don't, we've got a serious problem with democracy and how it's executed through the primary system in Maine as well as all over the United States. We also had a very serious problem with how the general election was operated and the individuals that believed that they could win and actually couldn't. So, but there's a larger question in terms of policy execution. We have a legislature that is largely not college educated. Now, God bless them, they're great people. You know, they're civic leaders, they're dedicated to what they do, they're wonderful souls to get out there and mix it up and do this. But they need to have these experts at the table with them. Now, those experts are not elected policymakers. So we need to trust the social wisdom of our elected leaders, but they need to be working with the right information. I don't have a complete answer to your question. I do know there's a group out there called the Next System, and they're actually talking about revising the American version of democracy in a fairly big way that is consensus driven, that appeals to right, left, and middle. So I encourage you to go look at it online, the Next System. It's a fascinating idea. They're just getting off the ground. I think they're on to something. They've got some of the right ideas. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
You had a section in there about economic opportunities, and there was, one of the bullets was packaging, and there, you said that there.
Well, our problem with agriculture in the state is that we know we're not going to be shipping strawberries to California. That's probably not in the cards for Maine. But by golly, why aren't we shipping excellent cheese and salad greens and root crops to Whole Foods in Boston? So we need intermediate scale packaging and distribution facilities. And that's not my idea, that's been recognized for a long time. Moo Milk was an attempt to do that, to deal with the fact that Hood Dairy could no longer get those northern farmers in their network economically. It failed. Moo Milk failed. We were their very first institutional subscriber, I'm proud to say, but it could have succeeded. It didn't fail because we could, the will wasn't there in many ways.
When I think of packaging, I think of things that are gonna be worse for the environment in general.
Oh, that's not at all necessarily true. Packaging doesn't necessarily result in massive waste. You know, when you get something from Amazon and it's packaged bad, complain about it. You know, so yeah, I could share your concern. Yes.
Are you aware of Crown Maine Organic
Yes.
Cooperative
Yeah.
in Northern Girl?
Yep.
Okay.
Outstanding
They're
examples.
They're
Yeah.
doing that, and
Yeah.
they're up and running, and they're in the state. I just want to
Yeah.
put that out there. I'm all for education, I'm all for intellectuals, I'm all for science, but isn't there a whole piece of the population missing when that's what's being touted in the front of the room, and not everybody is academically driven?
Sure. Tell me who you're thinking about.
Well, when one says that the elected officials don't have the wherewithal and they are common people doing a job, the trickle down of that kind of statement is very disconcerting.
Okay. I'm sorry if I offended you. My point is, I was science advisor to the Charlie Crist administration. I was working with legislators that had no technical knowledge. Now, I don't mean for that to be insulting or to denigrate that part of the population. I'm first generation. My parents didn't finish high school. So I believe in that, and I also complimented those legislators for their willingness to engage and their heartfelt desire to be community servants. I think the experts need to be at the table with them. They need to have the right information to work with. What I've just shown you is a very complex set of scenarios. I'm not sure that their instincts can give them everything they need to know. I'm not sure my instincts can give me everything I need to know.
Right, but the inclusion is very necessary in all that we put out.
Yeah, and I think we said that in terms of building the systems mapping approach, is that it's a comprehensive inclusion of everybody at the table. And I certainly agree with that. I don't think you and I have any issue.
No, and it's not an issue, it's
Yeah.
I'm making a, I've recently watched a marine biologist go from a town meeting about owlwise to a 4th grade, 5th grade classroom. And it was utterly amazing to watch the expertise of this gentleman who could speak to the adult community
Mhm.
and could then bring the
Oh,
conversation.
yeah.
This is what we need in all of our
Yeah.
because we are a we.
Yeah,
And if
that's
we
absolutely
keep
true.
segregating people,
Yeah.
especially academically,
No, I would never segregate. One of the big beefs that I have with the scientific community is we can't talk. We can't speak to the public and be understandable, and that's our failing. It's not the public's fault. Surely, if our work is important, we can communicate it. And so, I've had a lot of tutoring. I've had to get rid of the word anthropogenic from my vocabulary. All kinds of things I've had to change. I've got a long way to go still. But you're absolutely right. That inclusiveness is hugely
we
important.
all do, but the
Yeah.
disenfranchised is a big number.
Yeah, it
A
is.
lot of it
In this
is.
state, you're right.
We language
Yeah.
it in, we
Yeah.
language it in, and then we follow our words with actions.
No, you're absolutely right. I agree
Thank
with
you,
you.
thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Anybody else? Yeah. Did I?
If you were to name one country in the world that would be good to emulate with regard to planning for a sustainable future, what would that country be?
It'd be the Scandinavian bloc. They're well out of the gate. You can criticize them for having their wealth derived from the North Sea oil, but they know that those days are numbered, and they're working very hard to develop the adaptive infrastructure to take care of themselves. And we're not just talking about more dikes. We're talking about really innovative architecture, really innovative management of natural resources and farms. When I talk about natural resources, I include farms.
How about Germany?
Well, Germany is an interesting scenario. They've got a huge technological advance in terms of their solar power. They're still primarily fueled by coal, and probably will be for a while. The one aspect of their natural resources that they're doing very well that I understand is their forestry. There was a time when the foresters would say back in the early 90s that Germany was a lost cause, that its forests were in decline and they would never recover. Now it's accurate to say that the vast majority of forests in Germany are managed in a sustainable manner. So yes, there's a lot to learn from Germany. We need to get busy, I think. So, anyway, thank you all for your attention. And I hope I wasn't too long.